Hello, changemakers. Bonjour tout le monde. Tanchi, kia? I'm Mike Perry, and I'm honored to be the Executive Director of the Institute for Change Leaders. And welcome to this new Voices of Change podcast. The ICL equips people from all walks of life with the public narrative storytelling and concrete organizing skills they need to lead transformative, lasting, and progressive change in their communities that they and their communities want to see. We base our leadership programs on the work of renowned organizer Marshall Ganz at Harvard. Look around us. Times are tough. Where's the hope? Well, the hope is in all of us and in this new podcast for action. So won't you join us? And now, over to your Changemaker host.
Hello, world, to everyone listening and to all those who may have clicked on this podcast by accident. My name is Alex Treadaway, and this is ICL's brand new podcast, Voices of Change, where we talk to those who are making change, one voice at a time in Canada and beyond. And when we were starting this podcast, which is brand new for us, we thought, who can we get on? Who's impactful, who's interesting, who's funny, who's a real voice of change in their community? And they weren't free, but we do have someone today who's all those things and more. And as it's Pride Month, I thought we'd get someone on who has done a lot of work with the 2SLGBTQ plus community, and he's part of it themselves. He's an organizer, a community activist, an educator, a campaigner, and a person who's been a voice time and time again, speaking in unison for folks who can so often feel voiceless. He's also run for elected office, and most importantly, he's a great friend of both ICL and myself. Listeners, it's Brian Chang. Hello, friend.
Hello, friend. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? I'm liking the t-shirt today.
Yeah, I thought I'd wear something a little queer, and it's a Greenpeace t-shirt, so it also brings in a whole bunch of things that are passions for me, the environment, bringing in queerness to spaces in which we don't always find it, or it's not always revealed, or we have to protect ourselves.
You started off at ICL as an educator, contributing to the writing of the original ICL curriculum based on Marshall Gantz's kind of organizing approach. You've been an organizer with Public Service Alliance of Canada. You're now with OPSU as a campaigns officer, and you also sandwiched in a stint as a researcher at SEIU Healthcare. And sometime amidst all of that, you found time to run for Parliament 3 times federally in Toronto Centre. But let's first talk about community organizing. It's a word that we both use quite a lot. ICL uses a fair amount, and that you spend a lot of your adult life doing. Firstly, what is it for those who might not have engaged with it before, and how did you get your start in it?
Yeah, I think organizing is a challenging one for people to kind of wrap their heads around. I mean, simply put, we all know the theory. It's how to use the power that you have to create the change in the world that you want. But there's so much thought that needs to go into that. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of people. They're not sure why they do the things that they do, right? And it requires us as organizers to take a moment back and actually think about the reasons why we are the way that we are. Why do we push for the things that we do? Why are these issues important for us? And I think organizing is my approach to organizing is very much relational. It's not just why I do the things that I do, but why should you care about the things that I do? Why should I care about the things that you do? And how can we build those relationships together? And that is really key to a lot of the work that I'm doing. And I think a lot of people don't take the time to think through those things. And for me, that journey started back with Olivia in 2014.
Olivia Chow, ICL founder. If anyone's unsure of which Olivia we're
if you didn't know
to.
who Olivia Chow was. Yeah, I'm one of the original founders and people who worked with Olivia when we put together the Institute for Change Leaders. I was the very first, one of the very first teaching staff here at TMU when we put together the first class as well too, and taught that.
And that was back in 2015?
Oh gosh, I should know the answer to that.
2015?
No, we put together the Institute in 2015 when Olivia got the professorship here.
Yeah.
I am actually trying. I don't think we taught the first class. We didn't teach until 2017. The spring of 2017, I think, was the very first time that we offered the class in the spring term, which is fantastic. And and has continued to be offered up until Olivia left. So it's made quite an impact. And there are people that I still keep in contact with from that class as well too, who continue to make changes in their communities.
Yeah, I was going to say, because what was that like starting off at ICL? Had you done a lot of organizing before then? And did your view change as you were putting together that first class back in 2017, working alongside other folks and Olivia? What was that like as a process?
I think it's hard to think about kind of the political culture and what else was going on at the time. So this was, if we take ourselves back there, what was happening was that Barack Obama was still president of the United States.
Of course.
2008 and 2012 were such important campaigns that were using this kind of model for the first time. And it was, Canada lagged a little bit in terms of thinking through this kind of organizing in a really, really concrete way. And there are lots of great scholars who were doing this work already in the US. And then we were starting to model that work here. And it wasn't until Olivia's campaign in 2014, for mayoral campaign in 2014, in which we actually started to model that in real life here. And then to continue to build on that. So, but what we realized, and what Olivia talks about a lot, is that there was no place that was actually teaching these skills. So it was happening it was happening organically kind of in many places around the country, and in community organizing spaces and in labor and environmental groups, but it wasn't happening in kind of a concerted effort. And there was really a push to kind of institutionalize that, and create a space to have those kinds of conversations and exchange of learning. And that's what became Project Organize, which eventually became the Institute for Change Leaders, and continues to be work that we're doing in all of those spaces and more to this day.
It's fascinating to hear, because I obviously am aware, we know each other quite well, that you were there at the beginning, but I don't think I've ever really heard you talk about it for the first time. And I guess I'm really intrigued, as a follow-up to what you just said, where it was the first time we really getting into teaching that formally as an approach about community organizing and relational organizing, as you said. What from that early day period of ICL did you take to those spaces and are still in the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so a lot of those teachings you can find in those workbooks in the curriculum, which I helped design and wrote a lot of it. There are a couple things that I think are really important that have kind of guided the way that I approach my work, but I also are foundational in that, and that are really important to kind of the concept of organizing, which I think are important. And you mentioned relational organizing as well too. It's just, this all involves people, where like when we're talking about organizing, we're not talking about things, we're talking about people. And people are complicated, and they have existing relationships. They are capable of creating new relationships. They can damage relationships. They can build huge groups or constituencies of people as well too. So then there's that piece. So we're trying to organize the people, but then also the relational, the idea of power as well too, I think is really important. And one that I tried to bring to a lot of the ICL work was we have to be able to identify those power dynamics that are in place. And that matters so much, because far too often we see people who are really angry with the world or are trying to create change in the world, but they're not doing the work of identifying where the power structures are. And who are the people in which you need to leverage your power and your collective power towards? Because a group of angry people don't necessarily lead to an outcome unless they're directed in a very specific way and with some thought and a lot of intentionality behind that as well too. Because the other thing that we really want to avoid is situations in which we create conditions for other people to exploit that work. And so I'm always mindful of that as well too. It's like there are people waiting to exploit these kind of fault lines that we have. And the other theoretical thing that I think is really important, and I talk about theory a lot because I think people forget,
totally
like when it comes to, but when it comes to ICL, it's not, this isn't in a vacuum. Like these aren't just ideas that came out of nowhere. There is a lot of thought and a lot of theory and a lot of experience that has gone into figuring out these ideas.
It's kind of a bit dark, but we'll get that fixed.
Okay, we bring the light. And best practices, right? Like there are great scholars like Hari Han and Marshall Gans, of course, who have done a lot of this work. As well too, and lots of Indigenous scholars as well too, right across Canada, who have brought that kind of relational perspective to theory and power in a way that was kind of absent a few decades ago.
So having delved into that kind of theory of organizing, and we talked a lot about kind of political power and that aspect of targeting power, but it's not just political power, right? A lot of the work you do now is not so targeting politicians, but trying to leverage the power of employers and making sure folks have their rights protected in their workplace. Now, obviously, that has somewhat of a political impact, but maybe it's less direct than some of the work you've done before. In terms of some of the recent work you've done, particularly around workers' rights, do you want to kind of walk us through that and how actually power can come from bodies of people and communities as well?
I see all of so the way that I theorize and think about power is very much like they're all connected. So worker power and building worker power is directly related to people's abilities to advocate for themselves and their communities. Because we're all workers and we're all parts of communities. We all have jobs and we all give so much of our lives towards making money so that we can spend money. So it's about building struggles. And for a lot of people, the issues around work and the way they talk about work can be super complicated. It could be, I need to be able to afford hockey lessons for my son. Or it's like, I want to be able to save up enough money to go on vacation. I need to be able to save up so I can retire. I need to be able to afford my medication or to have a healthcare plan.
Yeah, or even just paying off your credit card, right?
Yeah.
At the base level, right?
Yeah. Or I just need to be able to eat.
Yeah.
Right? But we can unify around the fact that the employer isn't providing enough and that we are worth so much more than just a paycheck at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And that's what's really important, because oftentimes in labor organizing, the issues aren't directly related to necessarily how much money somebody is or isn't making. Of course, we want to make more. But it's things like, do you have vacation time? Do you have access to benefits? Do you have a regular schedule? Do you have any right to leave if you're sick? And there are so many workplaces in which the floor is the basic employment standards law, and then to add another dimension to that, if you're undocumented or if you are if you're being paid under the table, you end up with no protections whatsoever for those workers. And we've created these situations in which people can be exploited by employment. And when people are in such precarious places, we have to really raise the floor for everybody, because we can't just leave little bits or just do it for this one set of workers in a high paid industry or focus on the auto workers and forget about the nursing homes, right? There's so much work that needs to be done, and it doesn't matter what industry you're at. You can talk to any of your friends right now, and if they're working for the LCBO, if they're working for the Bay, if they're working for even universities, it's like the issues are precarious pay, not enough money, right? Contracts upon contracts, working for multiple years with the promise of full-time working and never getting it, and people are just are struggling. So I think it's really important for us to make those combinations, because you can build a coalition of workers. You can build a coalition of that worker who owns a home and a coalition of a worker who is trying to buy a home, right? Not everybody has to be in the same place in order for us all to work
exclusive.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also, as you said, I think change can look like a whole different things. It's not just, I think often people think about when you're organizing for working conditions, it's about the salary. But as you said, it's about so much more than just salary. It's about the quality of life and that work-life balance that folks have in their workplaces that you're also kind of expanding, and it's change across all these different sectors of their life, not just what's in their bank balance at the end of the day. Something I also want to talk about before we conclude today. Obviously, so much of your professional life has been around labor unions and that kind of workplace organizing, but so much, obviously, of who you are as a person is being a member of the queer community. And obviously, Pride Month here in June, I wanted to talk to you about how it feels to be someone who's making change not only in their professional life, but away from that as a member of a queer community here in Toronto, in Canada. And I guess you can take that as far as you want. Maybe you feel like you're much part of an international, wider, global community together. So I talk to me about how it feels to be someone as part of that community who's trying to form those relationships to make change for for people who've so often not had the change they deserve?
I think it's really important to take up space. Like that's another thing that I talk up. As somebody who's racialized, I also have a hearing disability, and as a queer person, I think it's important for us to take up space and to speak in those places. And one of the reasons why, and I say this a lot in trainings as well too, is that if we don't speak up for ourselves, other people speak up for us, and they speak for us in the wrong way. And this happens for the queer community all the time, in which straight so-called ally candidates or politicians or elected officials say they're there for the community, and sure, they might show up to Pride and they show up for the parties, but they're not there when things are messy and the community is really in threat. And that happens time and time again. Things are really difficult right now for the community. But the community isn't defeated by these things, nor is it defined by the hate that's put on the community. And the community is also not a monolith, and I think that that's really important. So the coalition, like when we say workers, and I was talking about like the broad coalition of workers that you can bring together, it's the same thing for queer people. Queer people are workers. Queer people are disabled. Queer people are sex workers. Queer people are professors. Queer people are bankers. Queer people own multiple homes. Queer people are conservatives. Queer people are Republicans. Queer people are in power and will actively try to take the rights away from other people, right? Like we're seeing that in Canada, where there are queer people here in office in Parliament Hill who are elected, who are in the Conservative caucus, who are not standing up for trans rights. They are okay with gay and lesbian rights, but they don't care to stand up for our trans brethren. And it requires us to work together. And I think that's why the queer community is such a good exemplar of what organizing is. It's because it requires us to recognize how different we are. And in talking about that difference, we can actually realize we have more in common than we do different. And then to respect that diversity and come together and fight for that. And that's why Pride is such a unique experience in which you're seeing all of these people come together in so many different ways. And I would like to think that that's what organizing is very much about, that we're a group of people with different experiences, different stories, all coming together to push for things. And I've seen the queer community come together time and time again. But I've also seen the queer community also, but like any other community, kind of attack itself as well too. But what it requires of us is to find the people who will work with us and who we can work with to help push for the change that we want. But we can't expect other people to do that work, and that's why we have to step up to be able to do it. And one of the reasons why I've run so many times for office was because we keep seeing non-queer people, non-disabled people, non-racialized folks, not people who are from the community step up, and then worse, they try to speak for the community, and then they speak for the community in the wrong way. And then the stories become, we start to erase people through that process. We start to erase the undocumented queer people. We start to erase the people who have HIV. We start to erase the people who are sex workers. We start to erase the people who are dealing with gentrification in the village and have to leave. We're starting to erase all of these things when we don't center people at the core of the work that we're doing, and allies just won't get it. They are not from the community, and it's really important for us to be able to speak not for the community but with the community, and that's work that I've tried to do very much over my years involved in politics, and work that I continue to do as well too. And it's not easy. And we will often get it wrong, and we will often find it really messy. But it's worth doing, and trying.
And I think that's really interesting, the way you talked about that and that representation element. Does your view of that and the queer community more widely and the involvement and the work that's happened there, and the relationships that are there, has that been changed by your work as an organizer in terms of how you feel yourself as a member of the queer community, regardless of your work?
Yeah, I think one thing I would take away or from that, or that I would bring to this conversation, is that like the work is ongoing, like it doesn't stop. And I think that's the important thing about organizing as well too. It's not like we're never done. So it's not like you've done. I've organized this group of people. They're great. They're self-sufficient. They're all good to go, right? Like
back next Tuesday, come back.
It's continuous, and you work with that, and you can do allyship and work in multiple different ways. Like Queers for Palestine is doing a lot of work to help support and build coalitions of queer folks to support Palestinian people here locally in Toronto, and to make those international connections as well too. You'll find queer folks who are working on so many different issues, and it's about having space for that and recognizing that the work isn't done. So we have to continuously do that. And people get older as well too, right? Like one thing I'm mindful of is I specifically grew up, I'm 37 now, but like I grew up like just the generation before me would have been the generation that was hit by HIV/AIDS the hardest here in Toronto, which means that there are a lot of queer Asian elders who didn't make it to the age that I'm at now.
Yeah.
Because we lost so many people during that epidemic, and to be mindful that we are bringing that knowledge forward and honoring all of that as well too, while trying to build up the upcoming generations and the newer generations and ourselves through that process as well. Because the work isn't done. And oftentimes we're seeing a repeat of the issues that are happening because people kind of forget or they think the battle's already won. But we have to continue to do this work time and time again. And
that feels personal to you because, as you said, so many folks from that community in past decades wouldn't have had that opportunity because they just wouldn't have gotten to that stage of life.
Yeah, and they didn't. And that's true of so many marginalized communities who have found themselves removed, excluded, and actively or disengaged from processes, especially ones related to power, right? So I'm not comfortable enough living on the margins of society, right? Like we have to push for better, and we deserve so much better than that as well too. And part of Pride Month is a time when we can push a little harder for the world that we want to build.
I think that's a great summary. I think if you're thinking of analyzing Pride Month, I think give up. That was a great kind of tour, I think, through it quite literally in terms and what it means to you, and also I think what the opportunity provides, not only as a celebration, but as you said, as a struggle, as a fight, which is obviously where, as you said, a lot of the history of that comes from, and where a lot of the work there continues to be today and indeed tomorrow. I think, particularly talking about people making change, and as a final question to Voices of Change today, I want to talk about what's the one thing that you might say if you wanted to create change, whether that's politically, whether that's in your community, whether that's just a very kind of subtle level. What's the one kind of aspect or trait you need as a person?
I think there are a couple. The first one that came to mind was curiosity. I think that's really important. Like you have to have an idea of the world and kind of a curiosity to prod the world and to peel things open and to try things out and to see what happens. But I think the number one thing I would say that people should have is humility. And I think that's true in a lot of situations, but especially in organizing as well too. It's like my approach to organizing and very much the kind of the best practice that we've learned from organizing is that it can't reinforce the systems you're trying to dismantle. If you're trying to dismantle an employer-centric system that's exploiting workers, you cannot recreate that system. If you're trying to dismantle oppressive political regimes, you cannot reinforce and recreate that system as well too. And through that, you need humility to recognize that this work doesn't necessarily require you as an organizer, as Brian Chang, like me being the person.
I might disagree, but yeah, for the personal point, continue.
Like somebody else could be there and somebody else can do that space. But while I'm there, I'm happy to inhabit that space and to take it up. But somebody else can also take up that space and do the same thing that I'm doing as well too. But also to admit when I've done something wrong, to try something new, to take responsibility for things that I have done wrong as well too, and then to move past that as well too. And I find too often white supremacy in particular and systems of employment and work, there's always, you always have to have your backup, you always have to have your shield up, you always have to have your defense up. And my approach to organizing very much requires us to dismantle those systems, to recognize that we are enough and we can do better, but we can do that in a collaborative way, not one that in which we're constantly trying to attack each other or rip each other's heads off for the sake of throwing somebody under the bus so that we can get further ahead. So I think humility is, that was a really long answer to say that I think humility is really important.
Be curious and be humble. I think it's a wonderful note to end on. And that's been Voice the Change, where we talk to those who are making change one voice at a time in Canada and beyond. And if you're Brian Chang, we recommend that you be curious and you be humble.
Curious and humble.
Thank you, friend.
Cheers.
Cheers and we'll glass to you. Yay.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.